Chapter 2 of The Valley of Silent Men. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. The Valley of Silent Men by James Oliver Curwood. Chapter 2. Outside Kent's window was spring, the glorious spring of the Northland, and in spite of the death grip that was tightening in his chest, he drank it in deeply and leaned over, so that his eyes traveled over wide spaces of the world that had been his only a short time before. It occurred to him that he had suggested this knoll that overlooked both settlement and river as the site for the building which Dr. Cardigan called his hospital. It was a structure rough and unadorned, unpainted, and sweetly smelling with the aroma of the spruce trees from the heart of which its unplaned lumber was cut. The breath of it was a thing to bring cheer and hope. Its silvery walls, in places golden and brown with pitch and freckled with knots, spoke joyously of life that would not die, and the woodpeckers came and hammered on it as though it were still part of the forest, and red squirrels chattered on the roof and scampered about in play with a soft patter of feet. "It's a pretty poor specimen of man that would die up here with all that under his eyes," Kent had said a year before, when he and Cardigan had picked out the site. "If he had died looking at that, why, he just simply ought to die, Cardigan," he had laughed. And now he was that poor specimen, looking out on the glory of the world. His vision took in the south and a part of the east and west, and in all those directions there was no end of the forest. It was like a vast, many-colored sea with uneven billows rising and falling until the blue sky came down to meet them many miles away. More than once his heart ached at the thought of the two thin ribs of steel creeping up foot by foot and mile by mile from Edmonton, 150 miles away. It was, to him, a desecration, a crime against nature, the murder of his beloved wilderness. For in his soul that wilderness had grown to be more than a thing of spruce and cedar and balsam, of poplar and birch, more than a great, unused world of river and lake and swamp. It was an individual, a thing. His love for it was greater than his love for man. It was his inarticulate God. It held him as no religion in the world could have held him, and deeper it had drawn him into the soul of itself, delivering up to him, one by one, its guarded secrets and its mysteries, opening for him page by page the book that was the greatest of all books. And it was the wonder of it now, the fact that it was near him, about him, embracing him, glowing for him in the sunshine, whispering to him in the soft breath of the air, nodding and talking to him from the crest of every ridge, that gave to him a strange happiness even in these hours when he knew that he was dying. And then his eyes fell nearer to the settlement which nestled along the edge of the shining river a quarter of a mile away. That, too, had been the wilderness, in the days before the railroad came. The poison of speculation was stirring, but it had not yet destroyed. Athabasca Landing was still the door that opened and closed on the great North. Its buildings were scattered and few, and built of logs and rough lumber. Even now he could hear the drowsy hum of the distant sawmill that was lazily turning out its grist. Not far away the wind-worn flag of the British Empire was floating over a Hudson Bay Company's post that had bartered in the trades of the North for more than 100 years. Through that 100 years Athabasca Landing had pulsed with the heartbeats of strong men bred to the wilderness. Through it, working its way by river and dog sledge from the south, had gone the precious freight for which the farther north gave in exchange its still more precious furs. And today, as Kent looked down upon it, he saw that same activity as it had existed through the years of a century. A brigade of scows, laden to their gunwales, was just sweeping out into the river and into its current. Kent had watched the loading of them. Now he saw them drifting lazily out from the shore, their long sweeps glinting in the sun, their crews singing wildly and fiercely their beloved Chanson des Voyageurs as their faces turned to the adventure of the north. In Kent's throat rose a thing which he tried to choke back, but which broke from his lips in a low cry, almost a sob. He heard the distant singing, wild and free as the forests themselves, and he wanted to lean out of his window and shout a last good-bye. For the brigade, a company brigade, the brigade that had chanted its songs up and down the water reaches of the land for more than 250 years, was starting north. And he knew where it was going. North and still farther north, 100 miles, 500, 1,000, and then another 1,000 before the last of the scows unburdened itself of its precious freight. For the lean and brown-visaged men who went with them, there would be many months of clean living and joyous thrill under the open skies. Overwhelmed by the yearning that swept over him, Kent leaned back against his pillows and covered his eyes. In those moments his brain painted for him swiftly and vividly the things he was losing. Tomorrow or next day he would be dead, and the river brigade would still be sweeping on into the grand rapids of the Athabasca, fighting the Death Chute, hazarding valiantly the rocks and rapids of the Grand Cascade, the whirlpools of the Devil's Mouth, the thundering roar and boiling dragon teeth of the Black Run, on to the end of the Athabasca, to the Slave, and into the Mackenzie, until the last rock-blunted nose of the outfit drank the tidewater of the Arctic Ocean. And he, James Kent, would be dead. He uncovered his eyes, and there was a wan smile on his lips as he looked forth once more. There were 16 scows in the brigade, and the biggest, he knew, was captained by Pierre Rossand. He could fancy Pierre's big red throat swelling in mighty song, for Pierre's wife was waiting for him 1,000 miles away. The scows were caught steadily now in the grip of the river, and it seemed to Kent, as he watched them go, that they were the last fugitives fleeing from the encroaching monsters of steel. Unconscious of the act, he reached out his arms, and his soul cried out its farewell, even though his lips were silent. He was glad when they were gone, and when the voices of the chanting oarsmen were lost in the distance. Again he listened to the lazy hum of the sawmill, and over his head he heard the velvety run of a red squirrel, and then its reckless chattering. The forests came back to him. Across his cot fell a patch of golden sunlight. A stronger breath of air came laden with the perfume of balsam and cedar through his window, and when the door opened and Cardigan entered, he found the old Kent facing him. There was no change in Cardigan's voice or manner as he greeted him, but there was a tenseness in his face which he could not conceal. He had brought in Kent's pipe and tobacco. These he laid on a table until he had placed his head close to Kent's heart, listening to what he called the brute, the rushing of blood through the aneurismal sac. "Seems to me I can hear it myself now and then," said Kent. "Worse, isn't it?" Cardigan nodded. "Smoking may hurry it up a bit," he said. "Still, if you want to—" Kent held out his hand for the pipe and tobacco. "It's worth it. Thanks, old man." Kent loaded the pipe, and Cardigan lighted a match. For the first time in 2 weeks a cloud of smoke issued from between Kent's lips. "The brigade is starting north," he said. "Mostly Mackenzie River freight," replied Cardigan. "A long run." "The finest in all the north. 3 years ago O'Connor and I made it with the Follette outfit. Remember Follette and La Douceur? They both loved the same girl, and being good friends they decided to settle the matter by a swim through the Death Chute.